Hello again, everybody, and welcome to this very special edition of Freeform Wednesday, my dudes and dudettes. I know it ain't Friday, but it's Wednesday, and you know what that means. We are back together at last, and we've got a lot to discuss this week. Alan, what's going on, sir? How are you?
Well, I'm doing great, David, and I tell you, as 2025 winds its way down to the end, always count on Freeform Fridays and Freeform Wednesdays with old school wrestling right around the bend.
Thank you so much, as always, for joining us. So much we need to get to. I first want to send a shout out to good buddy of mine, Matthew Jacobs, the bodacious suave, fellow Montrealer, who is also a member of the Masters of Wrestling podcast family, if you will, right alongside the Master Emir, Paul Roma, Mario Mancini, Rico Constantino, and many more.
Oh, yeah.
They were, Matthew was kind enough to give, well, not us, but myself, a shout out on one of his last episodes that he did alongside Emir. Thank you so much from yours truly, the Big Boss Man. And I don't know if any of you watched last night during the podcast that Matthew and Emir did alongside Rene Dupree, Cafe du Rene. Some sad news. Matthew announced that currently he's battling cancer and his chemotherapy starts in the middle of January. Matthew, I know we don't know you very well, but if there's ever anything you need, I'm here for you, buddy. Go and kick that bastard's ass.
That's right from the Big Boss Man's mouth. There you go.
Damn straight. And before we also get into some of the a lot of topics we have to discuss, we'll see if we can get to them all. I'm sure we will. What are your takeaways or comments on the recent tragic events that took place this past weekend involving legendary actor, director Carl Reiner and his wife Michelle, who tragically were murdered at the hands of their very own son?
Well, that would be his son, Rob Reiner. Carl Reiner's actually been dead.
Rob Reiner, excuse me, not Carl. How dare I say, how dare.
Okay. No, I mean, honestly, I'm honestly glad that Carl, who lived to the ripe old age of 98, I believe, didn't live to see this. Because, I mean, what could be more horrific than giving birth to somebody who winds up killing you later on? I mean, it's happened before. It's happened here in Montreal before on several occasions. And the fact that Rob Reiner is such an incredible artist and philanthropist and such a good soul who everybody liked, and of course his legendary acting roots on All in the Family and such, very big part of my childhood, and the movies, of course, too, and just such a kind soul, a giver, somebody who cared about the betterment of the human race. It's almost criminal when you think that some of the people who've only done nefarious things or selfish things. And here you have somebody who he and his wife were so giving to so many causes and just such exemplary human beings. I don't think you'll find anyone to say a bad word about them. And this is what happens to them. It just doesn't, it's inexplicable. It's horrific. And it's just makes your jaw drop. I mean, if you ever saw the work of Rob Reiner, and this is, I mean, I don't know. I've been really gobsmacked and flabbergasted and saddened and mortified by the whole thing. I just, there's enough bad news in the world than something like this. This is like, you'd like to think beyond preventable, and look what happened. And just a total mess, a total disaster. And here you see Dad lives to 98 and Rob gets cut down by his own kid, like in his 70s. And just unbelievable. And I reiterate, I'm glad Carl didn't live to see it.
Mm-hmm. And to go over, I can give you a few examples of some of Rob Reiner's excellent body of work. Um, he's done comedies as well as dramas.
Sure.
You know,
And
such as
fantasy too.
such as When Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride, A Few Good Men.
And he loved working with Andre the Giant. There's the wrestling connection.
Yes. hmm And Rob, you could tell, genuinely really cared about people.
Including his son, I'm sure, whatever the conflicts were. I mean, I don't think his kids have normally had anything bad to say, unlike, let's say, the late Jerry Lewis's kids or Milton Berle's kids or even Michael Landon's kids. But honestly, other than what's going on here, I mean, Rob Reiner was probably thought to be an excellent father, I think, for the most part. And just the idea of killing your own parents is such a I mean, unless your parents are like natural born killers or whatever. I mean, why would you kill your? I mean, I know why. I mean, why? I don't mean why. It's senseless. It's unbelievable. But I mean, it's like one of the ultimate taboos, and yet, for whatever reason, it happened. If he is guilty, I don't know. They haven't convicted his son yet of doing it. I mean, he's been arrested, but
Well, this is the thing. Everybody's innocent until proven guilty, but in this day and age, everybody's guilty until proven innocent.
yes, even Vince McMahon.
Even Vince McMahon. And one of the other reasons I'm bringing this up is because this was on my feed on X or Twitter, as it was revealed that Mick Foley has decided to leave the WWE. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, he's not with the WWE. You're right. Mick has decided not to renew his Legends deal when it comes up in the new year. The reason being is because Mick Foley is, well, he's a card carrying Democrat, and he said that he no longer wishes to support WWE because of their endorsement and their involvement with the White House, so to speak. And Jim Cornette, for one, applauded Mick Foley for saying that he has a backbone, that he's got the balls to just say what's on his mind and just not give a shit. And then there are others that say, well, he's pretty much nothing more than just a hypocrite.
Mick Foley's a hypocrite?
Well, in the wrestling business, who isn't?
Yeah, really. Well, I mean, I don't even understand why in this new world everybody's politics is so, like involved in everything. Like, everybody can't just be quiet and entertain. I mean, it's interesting that some of his greatest matches came with The Undertaker, because he's obviously, The Undertaker is an ardent supporter of the U.S. president. And I understand Donald's previous involvement with the wrestling industry, but I just wish politics could be left at home, and it is very ugly politics. And you got to give it to Mick in one way, though. I mean, that's pretty brazen. I mean, he's totally going against the tide of almost every big name in WWE who is pretty much openly palling around with the president or whatever. And I don't know what to say, but I just wish, there was a time when politics didn't infiltrate every aspect of our lives, certainly not entertainment. And I'm very, very disturbed to hear that it's been that way for a while now. And this is funny because he's like swimming against the tide. So
And we could talk a bit about this, but there's already been no shortage of people on YouTube, within the IWC community, talking about what we just discussed, as well as this past Saturday night's main event with John Cena's last match.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And we're here to do the things that a lot of the other podcasts and shows won't do. And and talk about the great glory days and times gone by. And we can touch certainly upon these things, but basically, we like rewinding the clock to a more innocent time of debauchery and political incorrectness. That is old school wrestling.
There you go. And that is why we are different than everybody else. And if you haven't already, may I remind you, if you haven't done so, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe, and make sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell and turn on all notifications so that you can be advised when we go live and when we upload some new content.
Well, yeah, and yeah, exactly, and listen to what David's saying, and also, greats like the late great Killer Kowalski, Vladek Kowalski, and many other wrestlers have said the key in wrestling is to stand out and be different. And Freeform Friday or Wednesday or whatever day we do it, we are different. So, rub up next to us, rub elbows, say hi, slap your hands, slap that subscribe button, do whatever you got to do. So.
Say hi, don't be shy.
That's right. Otherwise, we will cry. Well, maybe.
All right. And how would you like to get started? I know we had a lot of topics to discuss. Where shall we get started?
I think we should start with the passing of a wrestling great that nobody heard about for 5 months, and in the wrestling world, and because he kept his distance, certainly his right to do so. And I'm talking, of course, about the late great Mr. Electricity, Steve Regal, who shan't be confused with, of course, the man who would go on to become William Regal, Steve, the original Steve Regal. That's actually his real name. The one known as William Regal and formerly Lord Stephen Regal, and before that, just Steve Regal. His real name is Darren Matthews, of course, I believe. And this Steve Regal basically lit a lot of the late 70s and 80s. Well, I'm not going to say he lit it on fire, but he certainly was really, really good at what he did. He wasn't. Did you want to say something about Steve Regal first, David, or should I just go into it? Do we have you?
No, all good. No, I was just saying off camera, all good.
No, I can't see you.
Go ahead, by all means.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I didn't see you. Okay, so yeah, basically, for those of you who don't know, there was a man called Mr. Electricity, Steve Regal, who was a very exciting performer who came onto the scenes in the late 1970s. He started around the same time as Hulk Hogan did. And basically, the reason he got started is in high school, he met a young lady named Julie Snyder. And Julie Snyder was the daughter of the legendary old school wrestler Wilbur Snyder. And Wilbur Snyder was very much tied in with Dick the Bruiser Atlas's wrestling promotion, which was kind of aging out slowly in the Indianapolis area. And Steve Regal was originally a contractor by trade, and he married Julie. But they were a couple, I think, for a long time, and he wasn't in the wrestling business. But at one time, because he was a contractor, Wilbur Snyder, who I wouldn't say he was a top name like Dick the Bruiser was, like the Crusher, like, of course, Bruno Sammartino, the aforementioned Kowalski, but he was, he was right under that. So you could see a guy like Wilbur Snyder challenging for the world title, even if he wasn't really holding it. But at this time, when the territories were still alive and well, Dick the Bruiser had retired, or just about retired, took over the Indianapolis, Indiana promotion in the mid-'60s. And 13 years later, he had basically, or maybe 12, he asked Regal if he could maybe build him a wrestling ring because he was such a good contractor. Regal said, sure. And next thing you know, he built it. And next thing you know, Snyder and Dick the Bruiser asked Regal if he could possibly even start driving the ring around to different wrestling shows that they were putting on. And Regal, for money, he took the job. And so he went from being involved with Julie Snyder, the daughter of Wilbur Snyder, to building Dick and Wilbur a wrestling ring, to actually lugging it around. So eventually he thought, maybe I'll give this a try. So he got in. I mean, it was already in the family, right? So he got into, he trained. He had a very brutal training too. In that period, and he described it as quite arduous, like the Vern Gagne training camp type of deal. And he got into it around 77, and he started out basically in the WWA, the Indianapolis promotion, and he teamed up with another guy who had it in the family, a guy named Spike Huber. And Spike Huber was an interesting guy because he actually wound up marrying Dick the Bruiser's daughter, the aforementioned Dick the Bruiser Atlas, rough and tumble old guy from the old school, the old school. And they were a hot team, and but Regal really had something because he looked a bit like a surfer, and he wasn't tall, but he had the really amazing blonde hair and a good physique, and he really learned his craft. He was very good in the ring, so he did pretty well in the WWA. But you couldn't go that far because it wasn't big a promotion, and it only covered a couple cities in that area, and it was also starting to decline. So Steve Regal got the itch to get out of the WWA and looked around where he could go, and he thought about, Dick the Bruiser said he could get him into Memphis maybe, or Snyder said that. So he looked into it, but actually I think he wound up first in the NWA, the Mid-Atlantic section that Jim Crockett and company were running in Charlotte, North Carolina, and sort of was a lower card guy at that time. I think he was mostly by himself, if I recall, but that wouldn't be his only run with the NWA. Sometime after that, he did go to Memphis and had a great time working under Jerry Lawler and Jerry Jarrett. And he also formed a really high-end tag team there with the legendary Boogie Woogie Man, Handsome Jimmy Valiant, who in the 70s, of course, was part of the Valiant Brothers in the WWF. But Jimmy Valiant was becoming a really huge star on his own, had a totally different look and character than he did in New York with the WWF. And Valiant and Regal did quite well for themselves. And just like with Huber, they won the belts for a while and this and that, good tag team. And then Regal started migrating through different areas. He wound up in Portland in the Pacific Northwest under Don Owens' promotion. And he even won the heavyweight title there for a while and had great experiences. He formed a tag team with Jesse the Body Ventura for a little while there and was good friends with Jesse for many years. It was brief. It was before Jesse was really big, I think, in for sure in the WWF, but even before his more popular AWA run with Adrian Adonis and such. He did great in Pacific Northwest, working with the likes of Mad Bourne and the late Mad Bourne. And he's one of the few people who has really good things to say about Mad Bourne and doesn't diss him for his personality the way that guys like Jim Duggan and Ted DiBiase and so many others have done. He loved being with Mad Bourne, being around him and tag teaming. And eventually he moved on from the Pacific Northwest and sort of migrated basically, I believe, to the AWA at that point. And in the AWA, it would be basically the highlight of his career, because at first he was given a run with what was then the AWA Lightweight Championship. Not a very complimentary name, but before the name Cruiserweight hadn't been coined yet. Junior Heavyweight had, but they didn't call it that. That was what New York called their belt in the WWF for a while. So he became the AWA Lightweight Champion, and of all people, he wound up feuding with and defeating Rock and Roll Buck Zumhofe for that title. Now, Buck Zumhofe is a pretty infamous name in the wrestling industry nowadays because of his absolutely horrendous criminal history, and he'll probably be spending the rest of his life behind bars. As well he should. I hope he never gets out. I mean, his crimes are absolutely heinous. I don't know if everybody, most people probably didn't know back then, and he was such a friendly, charismatic, cheerful guy. Anyway, Zumhofe and Regal. Zumhofe was, actually the baby face. Not obviously he's a real heel in real life, but at that time he was a popular baby face, and he used to carry the ghetto blaster to the ring and dance around. And when I asked you the question, David, you said you remembered Zumhofe quite well, and from his wrestling days, and Regal and Zumhofe really lit it up for a while. But Regal's real claim to fame is when he wound up teaming with none other than gorgeous Jimmy Garvin, who David and I had the pleasure of meeting last year here in Montreal. And Jimmy Garvin and Steve Regal were basically inheriting the babyface tag team role over from, whoever was, I guess, the big babyface team before that. But the thing is the big story was that the Road Warriors were about to move out of the AWA. They had their big feuds with Crusher Blackwell and Patera and all those people. And the Road Warriors were leaving. And the idea came about that Regal and Jimmy Garvin could actually take the tag team titles from the Road Warriors. And on paper, it didn't seem possible because Hawk and Animal were so big and muscular and were just plowing through people, and they were almost indestructible. So how could these two smaller guys, Garvin and Regal, take the belts? But they did in 1985, and it turned out to be the upset of the century. Most people just were in absolute shock. And the Road Warriors would go, I think, back to Japan for a while and then emerge in Jim Crockett's Mid-Atlantic NWA territory. And basically, Regal and Garvin were actually crowned the champions. It's a very popular match because it's the ultimate example of the underdogs defeating the favorites, pretty much. And these were tough matches. And, when anyone got in with the Road Warriors, it was tough. But Regal and Garvin bit their tongue, bit their lip, and just did it. And they would reign for a while as the tag team champions. And Regal's stock went up in the business. It took actually I guess looking back, a pretty famous team of Curt Hennig and Scott Hall to defeat Regal and Garvin for the AWA Tag Team Championships. And needless to say, Scott Hall was a very big guy, and Curt, of course, was on the rise, and they got the belts off of Regal and Garvin, but Regal and Garvin's win over the Road Warriors stands as one of the fundamental huge upsets of the 1980s. And of course, the Road Warriors would go on to do great things. Regal found himself, though, basically wanting to migrate again, and he basically went back to Jim Crockett Promotions, where he had been before that in the late 70s. But this time he wasn't totally a lower card guy, but he actually found himself in a very entertaining series of junior heavyweight title matches with longtime junior heavyweight favorite Denny Brown. And Denny Brown was the champion, but eventually, after a few tries, Regal unseated him and would parade around as the NWA junior heavyweight champion. This is around 1986. Eventually, he would lose the belt back to Denny Brown and decided basically he was going to leave the NWA and take his shot up north in the WWF. So even though most people don't remember it, from 1986 to 87, last few months of 86 into 87, Steve Regal had a World Wrestling Federation contract. They dropped the Mr. Electricity name and all that, and he basically came in as enhancement talent, because at that time there were so many huge muscular stars and tall, big men who were the top superstars of the WWF at the time. So Regal was kind of there to, make others look good, and he would often team up even with other enhancement talent like Terry Gibbs and guys like that. And but he did his thing, and he made his money, and he was already deciding that he was coming close to, because he was coming close to 35 years of age, he wanted this to be his last shot. He couldn't stand the travel in the WWF. He liked the organization. He thought the pay was good, but the travel was just murderous, and he wasn't in his 20s anymore. And he decided that he was going to basically put the exclamation point on his full-time wrestling career. And there's actually a well-known match he had. I'm forgetting who he was teaming with now. Maybe it was Pedro Morales, could it have been? But they actually wrestled locally famous and internationally famous Rougeau brothers on an episode of Wrestling Challenge, which might have been one of his absolute last ones before Regal left. So he had a good short time there, and then he decided, well, he's going to kind of take it easy a bit. But what happened is a local promoter for the Chicago area, who was running a fledgling organization called Windy City Wrestling, called up Regal and said, I'd love to have you come work some shots for us and see how it goes. And because he was living in Indiana throughout all this, where he had settled with his wife, Julie, again, Julie's family, of course, being Indiana, and he himself, I believe, was from Indiana. But he couldn't resist the chance to work for Windy City. It wasn't super far away geographically. And very quickly was made the Windy City Wrestling Heavyweight Champion. I remember I got a lot of coverage his time there in the wrestling magazines, both the Apter Mags, the Stanley Weston publications, as well as a bunch of the others. And Regal spoke very highly of the promoter, a guy named Sammy DeCero, who tried his best and lasted for a bunch of years, but basically was also swimming against the tide because the WWF and NWA were just too powerful at this time and very hard to keep up a new regional promotion. He did for a number of years, and Regal wrestled for him for a number of years, also went a few other places for occasional shots. But by the time that Windy City Wrestling closed down in 95, Regal really called it a career, I believe, the next year, 1996. And basically just became a civilian after that. Worked in the auto parts industry and did a few other things, and just basically continued as a somewhat anonymous civilian with a past on television up until his retirement, which was, I think, around 10 years ago, and lived a quiet life. Didn't go to too many wrestling conventions or eventually he did when people started like wondering what happened to him, and then he decided that it was more fun to not leave home so much. So it took a lot to get him to come back into the wrestling community. But he did a little for, did some shoot interviews, did some fan conventions, but that was pretty much it. And people mostly lost track of him. He didn't stay in touch with too many people. He stayed in touch with Jesse Ventura for sure. Not too many others, I think, but he was one of those guys who was dismayed at many of the people he traveled with and knew who were no longer with us, such as Matt Bourne and Buddy Rose and Buzz Sawyer. A lot of these guys are now kind of infamous for different reasons, but he loved them all pretty much, and that was it. Everyone thought he was living a quiet, retired life, when all of a sudden, I think it may have been a heart issue that he had, but I don't know for sure. And in July, he just passed away. And unlike most wrestling deaths, nobody really heard it until several months later. And at 73, Steve Regal turned in his electric wing, shall we say, and went to the big wrestling ring in the sky. And that was kind of very sad. Really nice guy, apparently. Just was happy to live a quiet life and get out of wrestling young. He didn't stay around, and he talked about that. He didn't stay around till he was like 65 years old or whatever. He knew that 35, 40 was not only his limit. He felt it should really be everyone else's limit too. And that's it. He retracted. Part-time, became a part-timer at age 35, and then as his early 40s began, he just faded away and was happy to do so, and apparently lived a good family life. But as one of the survivors of the wrestling industry from that era, it's quite sad to see him just vanish, and then not just vanish from sight, but actually pass away and without much fanfare. And but we'll always remember the first Steve Regal. He didn't have a problem with Darren Matthews using the name, and it actually got him a little bit more publicity later in life, and people were curious about the original Steve Regal's matches, thanks to the man who became William Regal, and sold a few more dolls, and they made action figures finally out of Regal and Jimmy Garvin's team. I believe I know for sure, and. Yeah, just he's a good guy, lived a good life, and It's too bad that it ended kind of prematurely, but I guess in wrestling, if you make it to 73, you're doing something right. So rest in peace, Steve Regal.
Absolutely. Well said. Better than I could have ever said about Mr. Regal.
Yeah. It's, there's getting less and less of them that from the golden days of old wrestling that are still with us.
Right. What about so the other topic that we wanted to discuss was WCW TV tapings that took place back around the 9th of December 1991 at Center Stage in Atlanta, Georgia. 575 fans stumbled in to watch quite the extravaganza or lack thereof.
They stumbled in with their brown paper bags. And yeah, exactly. I don't know, but well, that's it. And just an interesting snapshot of a time when WCW was undergoing a series of even more changes, and these were the last days of the infamous Jim Herd, or I think David refers to him as the Pizza Man. Is that what you call?
Well, I didn't come up with the name.
Oh.
That was what Ric Flair said that the boys called him.
Yeah, yeah. Right. Because of course he was an executive at Pizza Hut back in the day, and only got involved in wrestling because he happened to be, I think, a camera operator, or a station director at the St. Louis main TV station, where they had some of the most successful wrestling of the 60s and 50s. And I guess he was old enough for the 50s too. St. Louis under Sam Muchnick was a super hot area for wrestling, that section of the NWA. And so anyway, he was exposed to a lot of wrestling, so he seemed like the guy to hire. Well, he wasn't. But he certainly had a very well. At least they remember him. You know, they say at least we'll never forget the run of Jim Herd. Say what you will about him, but pretty hard if you're a WCW fan to forget the good, bad, and downright ugly that Jim Herd did. This is actually December 9th, 1991. We're getting right to the end of Jim Herd's reign of terror, if you will, as the president of WCW, or whatever his title was. And he would soon be replaced by the attorney, K. Allen Fry, Kip Fry. But at the end of 91, we're starting to see some positive changes after a pretty dreadful 2 years in WCW. We're starting to see some exciting things, like the formation of the Dangerous Alliance, with Paul Heyman gathering 5 of the best wrestlers around and forming a real kick-ass stable. Composed, of course, of beautiful Bobby Eaton, stunning Steve Austin, who, of course, would go on to many great things, the living legend Larry Zbyszko, ravishing Rick Rude, and the enforcer Arn Anderson, along with probably the greatest woman wrestler at that time in North America, Medusa Michelli. Pretty unstoppable faction. And, of course, these are the days after the Four Horsemen had broken up again for the 3rd or 4th time. And the Dangerous Alliance was taking over, and also they were bringing in amazing talent like Rick Rude, who had just come in around that time. They brought back Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, which was super exciting. I never thought I'd see him again there after what happened with his NWA WCW run in '89. He did not get along with Jim Herd, or as the rumor goes, Jim Herd did not get along with Bonnie Steamboat, his rather aggressive wife, who I think negotiated his contracts with him. Now, when Ricky Steamboat first came back in '89, he wanted to work with George Scott, who he's always had a great relationship with. George Scott booked Steamboat very strong in the late '70s, saw the greatness in him in the Mid-Atlantic territory, and was also the booker in the WWF for Vince McMahon that brought in Steamboat the first time there in 1985. And Steamboat, like that. But Jim Herd, well, there was not the same. And George Scott was fired in April of '89. So basically, Steamboat found himself not working with George Scott. And by July 31st, he opted not to renew his contract. He disappeared. Would he ever be back? Well, yes, he would. And he came back in November of 91 to win the World Tag Team titles with the natural Dustin Rhodes, baby. And it was a pretty exciting team because, first of all, Steamboat's return at Clash of the Champions, I want to say 17, yeah. Clash, it was a surprise. The Dustin Rhodes couldn't team up with Barry Windham. Barry Windham was injured by Arn Anderson and I think Larry Zbyszko, the Enforcers. They slammed his arm in a car door, kayfabe, and then he had a cast on his wrist, so Dustin needed a new partner to challenge the Enforcers. Yeah, of course, it was the Enforcers that did it. They were the opponents. They knew what they were doing. So basically, Dustin had a mystery partner. A guy came out with a dragon head, and it turned out to be Ricky Steamboat when he took off the dragon head. So we're right after that period there, and Cactus Jack Mick Foley, who we talked about a little earlier, had made his return and came out of a box and attacked Sting. So there was a lot of excitement there with Abdullah the Butcher and Cactus Jack. And as David will tell you, Jim Cornette said, everybody who comes out of a box is automatically over. And Mick Foley's Cactus. Right, David?
Well, God damn it, anyone who comes out of a box is instantly over. Just to try telling that to Shitstain, the Archbishop of Talonberry, Vinny Rubro.
That's right. I mean, he sent people over the ramp in boxes, but I don't think he ever, somebody too often came out of a box that they weren't trying to make fun of or do whatever. So yeah, good point, Mr. Cornette and Mr. David. So all right, so let's look at the matches that were happening that night on Saturday night. A little analysis. The first match had basically Marcus Alexander Bagwell, who's certainly famous in this day and age, especially more famous now than he was then, I'm sure. At this point, he had just debuted about a month earlier, and of course, was brought into wrestling and WCW by Missy Hyatt, who actually initially had her eye on Marcus's brother, who was a really great-looking bodybuilding type guy, and Missy happened to live in the same apartment complex as one of the Bagwells. And I'm sure Marcus was there too, or was the one, or whatever. The brother came around, but the brother didn't want to get into the wrestling business. Marcus said, "How about me?" type of thing. Next thing you know, he didn't start out in WCW. He wrestled in Georgia as Fabian in the Georgia independent scene. He went to Global and wrestled as the Handsome Stranger, and he supposedly had enough experience by late 91 to come into WCW. Some would argue maybe not, but he did look good, and he was a good athlete, I guess, but he was a work in progress, and on this show he defeated somebody who didn't need any work because he was such a seasoned veteran in terms of polishing his ring style. And I'm talking, of course, about the great Rip Rogers, who also has a very strong internet presence in the era of podcasting and such. After that, we went to the aforementioned Cactus Jack, who defeated Pistol Pez Whatley. And Pez Whatley's an interesting guy. I've talked about him on the show before. Another unsung hero of wrestling, almost like Steve Regal, a guy who did so many cool things in so many places, but kind of forgotten by fans. For WWF and WCW fans, he was an enhancement talent. The only slight exception is when Jim Crockett's NWA was in its last year or so before selling to Ted Turner. Pez Whatley formed a very flamboyant tag team with Tiger Conway Jr., where Pez Whatley became Shaska Whatley, and they put on these amazing suits and top hats and called themselves the Jive Tones. They stayed an underneath tag team, but they were certainly interesting visually to watch. And Pez Whatley was very good in the ring. I have a special affinity for Pez Whatley, actually, for his run in the Continental Wrestling Federation in 1988, where he changed his name. This is after the Fullers, like Robert Fuller and all them, got out of Continental and sold it to that guy, David, I forgot his last name now. Anyway, so Pez Whatley had a run in Continental as Willie B. Hurt, which I was very entertained by. He had a very hot angle going with Eddie Gilbert, where I think it was Gilbert beat up his son, who wasn't his real son. They got somebody to play the part, and it was a very exciting for a regional promotion, Continental was making waves. At that time, they had Dr. Tom Pritchard and Dirty White Boy Tony Anthony, the future TL Hopper, in a very exciting feud. They had the original Demolition Smash, Randy Colley, who had abandoned both his Moondocks Rex persona and the Smash persona, but became Detroit Demolition. Look it up on YouTube, kids. Detroit Demolition and Continental. So it was a very happening territory for a small, in regional territory. Anyway, Pez Whatley really shined, I found, as Willie B. Hurt. I like the gimmick. I like the angles. Pez Whatley had wrestled all over the United States and done reasonably well. Anyway, by 1991, he was a WCW enhancement talent, and he went down to Mick Foley, Cactus Jack. After that, we get the exciting team of the the heck were they called? The Patriots. That's it. Firebreaker Chip, who we talked about last week or a few weeks ago when we were talking about Stampede Wrestling, when Curtis Thompson, Firebreaker Chip, wrestled under a mask as the Archangel, I believe it was, in the last days of Bruce Hart run, Stampede Wrestling. He went on he was also a Jim Crockett enhancement talent known as Curtis Thompson, also wrestled as U.S. Mail, but instead of Postal Mail, it was M-A-L-E. He was like a Chippendale type of guy. Certainly great looking guy, had a great physique. So he came back as a fireman, a firefighter in WCW with Todd Champion, who kind of clumsy guy, really tall. He did defeat Jerry the King Lawler, I believe, for the USWA heavyweight title a year after this. So we can't say that Todd Champion didn't have some success in the wrestling business, but here he was paired and did become US Tag Team Champions with Firebreaker Chip. So in this match, they were actually having an elimination tag team match with the guys who would be called the Young Pistols, and it turned heel by this time. Started out as the Southern Boys, talking, of course, about the Road Dogg's brother, Steve Armstrong, who would wrestle as Lance Cassidy in a short stint with the WWF the following year. And, of course, the late, great Tracy Smothers, who probably needs no introduction. He's done a lot of great stuff, and unfortunately, he had a WWF run as Freddie Joe Floyd as well in 1996. And the Patriots, though, got the win, so it goes to show you. I mean, Tracy Smothers and Steve Armstrong were really better talents than, well, I wouldn't say Firebreaker Chip was pretty good, but Todd Champion, other than his size, left a bit to be desired at this time. So anyway, speaking of leaving a bit to be desired, we go on to the next match, which had the one and only Van Hammer, 3 months into his heavy metal debut, Heavy Metal Van Hammer, who basically stands the test of time as one of WCW's failed experiments, even though he was around for quite a number of years. And now he's probably more famous in the wrestle crap category and for the legal trouble he's had in his civilian life in recent years. But we wish him the best. Mark Hildreth, otherwise known as Van Hammer, who got the win over independent veteran and enhancement talent Pat Rose on this show. They were pushing Van Hammer really hard, but he also had a weird attitude too. I know I've told the story before on this show. I don't know if David knew it or not before. Maybe he remembers it now, that the tidings weren't good when Van Hammer first got there, because he defeated Terry Taylor really fast at the previous Clash of the Champions in September. But I think one night at Center Stage, Arn Anderson and Bobby Eaton were talking. They didn't know Van Hammer yet. And he walked over to them like he was the king of the hill, and they're looking at him like, who are you? Certainly a big, imposing guy, but he didn't have a pedigree in wrestling. And he said, "Oh, I'm the guy that was brought here to save this company. I'm the guy who's gonna rescue WCW and make it great." And Arn Anderson, of all people to tell it to, he was so clueless. He didn't know that he was talking to two of the best wrestlers in the company, bar none, and in wrestling, modern history, Arn Anderson and Bobby Eaton. But that's how clueless, unfortunately, Van Hammer was. And no matter how many wins they gave him, no matter how much Mick Foley tried to get him over. Do you remember that story, David, about him going over to Arn and Bobby?
I've heard the story. I've heard the story a few times, and it's one of those awkward moments where it's like, you're a legend that this person doesn't know who the said legend is,
Yeah.
asks who he is, and then instead of being a gentleman, instead of being professional and being polite and introducing, yes, hello, I'm so and so, and this is my character, but then you come off as very brash and arrogant, saying, "Yeah, I'm the guy that's going to save this company. I'm the, I'm the."
The
I
savior.
remember, I remember, I'm the savior, but I remember a line that was written in the book Wrestle Crap, which I used to own a copy of, and I'm sure quite a few others did.
I did.
One of the lines they said that one of the lines that was said about Van Hammer was that the way he was presented on WCW television was as if they found a long lost member of Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But they were really hyping up the glam metal aspect of him because, well, obviously glam metal was in its final year of dominance, and they needed one. They needed, they already had a rapper. They had this, they had that, and they had the Freebirds with the Southern Rock. So you needed a heavy metal guy, and Van
I'll
Hammer
take
was.
I'll take Max Payne or Man Mountain Rock over Van Hammer any day of the week.
Yeah. Well, me too, me too. But you got to give it to Van Hammer though. One way or another, he lasted about 7-8 years. I mean, so they always had like this tiny morsel of faith in him, but he was really really green at this time, and he's lucky he had guys like Terry Taylor and Arn Anderson to work with, and of course Mick Foley as well. The next match had, speaking of the Dangerous Alliance, future industry leader, stunning Steve Austin, who at this time was the WCW television champion, get the win over another Wrestle Crap character known as Arachnaman. What do you remember about Arachnaman, David?
Oh, Arachnaman, one of the many, many gimmicks portrayed by none other than Brad Armstrong.
Another Armstrong. That's right.
And it was WCW's take on Spider-Man. And there were only two costumes ever made until Marvel Comics sent Turner or WCW the classic cease and desist letter.
Yeah. I wonder, again, this is like Jim Herd with the Ding Dongs trying to appeal to the young audience, the comic book audience. I don't know, like this having a wrestling Spider-Man if he can't swing from webs. I mean, what is, the only thing he could do, Arachnaman, was, aside from being a high flyer, kind of is throw those spin those webs from his wrists like another Max Moon type of, except instead of fire or whatever, or fireworks, it was like silly string. I don't know, silly string or something, right? That he used well when it worked. Sometimes it didn't work, I think, but WCW is the company that, or when it was the NWA, they infamously pushed some kind of strap match between the Fantastics and the Midnight Express, and by the time it was match time and they sold all those tickets, they forgot to bring the strap or the cowbell or whatever it was. Like, this is how dumb the company was at times, and so I don't trust them to make another Spider-Man. I'm not sure we needed one. It's just too bad again that the talent of the late great Brad Armstrong wasn't used properly, but he didn't have charisma much in front of the camera, but he certainly had ability. One of the most talented wrestlers around, for sure. Who, another unsung hero of wrestling, and Arachnaman fades into the Wrestle Crap pantheon of gimmicks that were, I wouldn't say they went wrong. They were wrong to begin with, but hey, at least he got to work with the world television champion, and Steve Austin handily defeated Arachnaman. As we go on, we get the very interesting team of Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker, who would be the famous trainer at the WCW power plant. And here he was working as half of the state patrol. I don't even know where the other guy, Earl James Wright, was. But Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker took another tag team partner, the York Foundation's Thomas Rich, which was Tommy Rich, doing continuing the Mike Rotunda Michael Wall Street type character with Alexandra York, Terry Runnels, of course, to Attitude Era WWF fans, and of course the future wife of Dustin Rhodes, aka Goldust. But Parker and Thomas Rich made a bit of an odd couple here, but they somehow managed to defeat Big Josh, who was, of course, the aforementioned Matt Bourne. Honestly, another waste of a great talent and a really dumb gimmick, along with Mike Graham, who was wrestling in the cruiserweight type category. Actually, they were calling it the light heavyweight. I believe the Richard Morton, when Ricky Morton became Richard Morton and turned heel, he had a big match with Mike Graham en route to winning the first WCW light heavyweight championship, when that championship was christened. But Mike Graham was basically almost an enhancement talent at this point, and luckily Big Josh, less than a year later, would go on to become the first Doink the Clown, of course. But in this time, they actually lost. Thomas Rich, looking really slick with his blonde hair greased into a ponytail in the back. He supposedly became a refined Wall Street type investment broker individual. Yet he used Alexandra York, a.k.a. Terry Runnels' laptop. And if you remember laptops in 1991, they were not as light and fluffy as they are now. They were big clunkers, and he hit, Mike Graham over the head with it. So Sergeant Buddy Lee could get the pin, as I recall. So interesting team. I don't know what happened to the State Patrol, and of course Buddy Lee Parker would soon disappear on and off and go run the power plant. And as a well-known character, as a trainer and such, and a lot of guys who were trained by him, they still talk about what was his real name, Dwayne Bruce? Yeah, Dwayne Bruce, I think. Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker. And in the big final of it was a shortened episode of Saturday Night. It wasn't Atlanta Braves baseball, but for some reason they were only on for an hour instead of 2. And a great main event, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat against beautiful Bobby Eaton in singles competition. Of course, Bobby Eaton and Arn Anderson of the Dangerous Alliance would wind up a month later taking the World Tag Team titles from Steamboat and Dustin Rhodes. That would be January 16th of 1992, when K. Allen Fry took the job and replaced Jim Herd. But here on Saturday night, Steamboat and Dustin were still the champs. On TV, they said Dustin Rhodes was wrestling on the UK tour of WCW in Ireland. I didn't verify it. Maybe it's true. They did do some tours of the UK then, and Steamboat and Bobby Eaton, two of the best workers, battling, and Steamboat would get the win, of course, one half of the tag team champions. And so went another episode in late 1991. I should note that Lex Luger was the world heavyweight champion at this time, and Steamboat and Rhodes, of course, the tag team champions. And Luger was on his way out of the company and, of course, would lose the title to Sting at Super Brawl 2 in February and would head to the World Wrestling Federation via the World Bodybuilding Federation. So there you have it, David. December 9th taping of WCW Saturday Night.
Yeah, and then moving on to December 7th, 1987. So 38 years ago, there was the 14th Saturday Night's main event, which would take place in Landover, Maryland, which would air on New Year's weekend in 1988. Tell us about that one.
Yeah. Well, to me, this was incredibly exciting. We were coming off a month after the Survivor Series, the first one, and the business was super hot. We hadn't yet lost in the WWF Paul Orndorff yet. We hadn't lost Junkyard Dog. We hadn't lost the British Bulldogs or Don Morocco. The list goes on. So WWF was still pretty much peaking here in its popularity, and they were starting to build toward the Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant 1988 main event a month later on NBC, which of course would draw the largest primetime wrestling crowd in television history. But they had to really set the stage. And so what they were doing on this Saturday night's main event, and I remember I was watching it as it aired I was unbelievably excited. I just come off not only Survivor Series, but the very interesting Slammy Awards, the second annual Slammy Awards, which had aired on NBC about 2 weeks before that. Wrestling was hot. WWF was scalding hot. And they just could do no wrong, it seemed like. They just couldn't do any wrong in terms of drawing attendance. The pay-per-views market, they were totally dominating, and just things were going really well for them. And what they were doing here is basically having a rematch between Hulk Hogan and King Kong Bundy from the previous Saturday night's main event, where in the first one, they actually had Bundy get the win by countout. So everybody was shocked that Hulk Hogan lost. Now, this aired 2 nights after that Survivor Series that I was talking about, and the first Survivor Series. And that Saturday night's main event, I had to rush home and watch because I was at the Montreal Forum watching at that time the highest attendance for wrestling the Forum had ever seen up until that point, with Hulk Hogan wrestling the one-man gang in the main event of that house show. That drew the largest crowd in Forum history for wrestling up until that point. But on our television screens, about a half an hour after the show ended or more, NBC aired the Saturday night's main event where Hogan wrestled Bundy. Bundy got the win. So on this New Year's weekend, they were going to have the rematch, except Bobby Heenan interfered in November for Bundy to get the win by countout, because how can you really beat Hulk Hogan one-on-one? Nearly impossible to do it fairly at this time. So what they decided instead is that Bobby Heenan would be barred from ringside, but Andre the Giant, who was out with Bundy and Heenan in November, would be the official corner man to replace Bobby Heenan in Bundy's corner. So Bundy and Hogan had their rematch, but the real story, it turned out, wasn't so much the match. Hogan got his win. Bundy would actually basically finish up in the WWF at this time. He was basically sent his walking papers in a way because he had gone behind Vince McMahon's back and done that series of computer commercials in Holland, I believe, in the Netherlands. You can still find those commercials on YouTube, I believe. And you didn't do stuff like that outside the company without Vince's permission. Look at all the wrestlers that wanted to make movies, and Vince didn't want to do it unless he had a stake in it. We didn't want to let them do it unless he had a stake in it. So Bundy committed one of the ultimate sins, but he also felt he wasn't being used that well anyway by this point. Bundy had been going around losing to Bam Bam Bigelow, who was the hot big man of that time. So Bundy lost to Hogan. That wasn't, I guess, such a shock. But what was the surprise is after the match, Hogan was feeling so empowered, he was beckoning Andre to get in the ring and fight him. And Andre at first looked like he was going to do it, but then he said, forget it. I mean, there was no sanctioned match. Even Jesse Ventura said, well, Andre's a smart guy because there's no money on the line. The match isn't sanctioned. He'd rather wait till he can get paid big bucks to wrest the title from Hulk Hogan, which, of course, prophetically would happen a month later. But as Hogan turned his back and started to pose, because as David will tell you, Hogan must pose. Right, David?
Yes, Hogan must pose.
Can't end 1987, 86, 85, or 88, whatever show, or even 89 without Hogan doing the poses after, especially even if he didn't emerge victorious. I think, maybe even after the match with Bundy the month before where he lost, he might have still been posing because, you can't send the fans home when Hogan is there without Hogan posing, right? So, but
hence, Hogan must pose.
Exactly. So as Hogan turned his back to pose, Andre snuck up on him from behind, and Andre was moving pretty fast at that time. A year later, he wouldn't be. And he grabbed Hogan from behind, and he headbutted him a few times, and then he started to choke him out. And this was really terrifying at this time to see this. I can remember, as a 12-year-old pre-adolescent watching this and seeing that Hogan couldn't break the grip of the Giant, and people were going nuts, and it was really, really, frenetic in there. It was really tense. And so eventually they got some people to come out of the back and try and rescue Hogan. The first two were actually the British Bulldogs, but Andre eventually swatted them away like flies and threw them both over the top rope together. And then you got the others coming out like Jake the Snake Roberts, the Junkyard Dog, forgot, I think 1 or 2 enhancement talent, etc. But even they, like Tito Santana, I think 4 or 5 of them couldn't get Andre's hands off of there. So Hacksaw Jim Duggan came out from the back, wielding his 2x4, or as David would call him, as per Bobby Heenan, the dumbest termite. But he wasn't so dumb that night because he managed to sneak up on Andre and hit him over the back several times with the 2x4. It wouldn't be like when he knocked him out and hit him in the head a few months later. That was a whole different thing. But once he hit him over the back 4 times with the 2x4, didn't seem to hurt Andre much, but at least he released Hulk, and then he turned his attention toward Duggan, and the other wrestlers were able to drag Hogan out of the ring, who was pretty close to passed out by this time. It was a very exciting angle, and it really built very strongly toward the exciting February 5th main event a month later. Now, for the rest of the show, like, this was by far the focus of the show. The other thing I was excited about on this show, as when I was watching it live, was that Strikeforce had just won the titles about 2 months earlier and were super exciting. As a matter of fact, when they taped this, I guess that it aired on TV on October 27. No, excuse me. I think it was taped October 27 when Rick Martel and Tito Santana defeated the Hart Foundation, but it was aired on television on November 7th. So they weren't champions that long. And I was very excited to see what they could do as champions. Now, they weren't the Can-Am Connection, granted. Rest in peace, Tom Zink. But they were something. And it was certainly an unexpected upset over Jimmy Hart's Hart Foundation, that time composed, of course, of Bret the Hitman Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. And the Strikeforce was going to defend in a 2 out of 3 falls match against the Bolsheviks, of all people. Slick's Soviet soldiers, Nikolai Volkov and Boris Zukov. Boris Zukov had recently replaced the Iron Sheik in the tag team with Nikolai. After the incident with Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik was fired for a while, and Volkov went out on his own, but eventually found another partner, and this time chose a fellow Soviet, quote-unquote, Boris Zukov, fresh off his AWA run. Boris Zukov, much like Nikita Koloff and Ivan Koloff and Nikolai Volkov himself, was not an actual Soviet Russian. Boris Zukov was played by Southerner Jim Nelson, who actually had a military gimmick in Crockett Promotions, Mid-Atlantic, before coming to the AWA. But he had fully morphed into the Soviet heel, Boris Zukov, and I didn't think Strikeforce were going to lose, of course, but it would still be interesting to see what they could do, because at that time, other than the Islanders and the Hart Foundation, they hadn't wrestled anyone else that I could think of. So exciting, kind of exciting, and Strikeforce got the win, not surprisingly, in this 2 out of 3 falls match. The other 2 matches on the show I thought were throwaways. They had Jake the Snake Roberts, who was in the Andre the Giant pull-apart, go against the Wild Samoan Sika. Now, that was also going to be a squash match to me, because basically Sika was on the downward turn, and he was just basically losing to everybody. On TV, he was going to lose soon to Bam Bam Bigelow. Sika had lost to Hulk Hogan on the I don't even know what he did to earn a title shot. It was it was almost a squash match too. So Sika, of course, the father of Roman Reigns, may he rest in peace, Sika, basically here lost to Jake, and just to send the fans home happy with that match, Jake the Snake Roberts wound up DDTing his manager, Mr. Fuji. So good old Mr. Fuji could still take bumps, but Jake and Sika was not a good match. Sika versus anyone at that time was not really a good match. You can even see house shows where Sika at that time was just plodding.
Well, it was a whole throwaway match, but at least I was on TV.
And that reminds me, great segue, which reminds me, March the 28th, 2026.
Jake the Snake Roberts and Cheryl are going to be coming to Montreal. And for all information, you go to www.collectandconnect.ca. You can buy your tickets, and you can also get all kinds of stuff that Cheryl and I can sign for you, including those ravishing Rick Rude types.
Oh, I'd love to see that, I tell you. But yeah, that's going to be super exciting, fans. Don't miss that. And true living legend, one of the few who's still around and certainly overcome much adversity, Jake the Snake Roberts coming to Montreal in March of 2026. Get your tickets. Walk, don't run. Start typing as they do now. We used to run to the Ticketmaster outlets. We don't do that anymore, David, right? Our fingers do the running for us.
Yeah, and our internet connection, reliable or not.
Yeah, exactly. I have very fond memories, though, of showing up at my local Sears outlet to buy tickets for WWF house shows at the Montreal Forum, and just so thrilled to walk away with these tickets in my hand. Not that I printed out on a computer or whatever, but to actually have to take the effort to go to a ticket outlet and buy World Wrestling Federation tickets. It was really something. So, anyway.
I'm old enough to remember a time where you used to go to the local shop, your local retail outlet to go and buy yourself some tickets if you couldn't make it to the venue itself.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So these were, and it was just more, yeah, it was geographically desirable too. If you happened to live near the ticket outlet and you didn't want to go across town to buy the tickets, just to get the tickets in advance, for sure. But yeah, them were the days. But these are the days when Jake the Snake Roberts and reunited once again, as the song goes, with the lovely Cheryl Roberts, who of course his TV presence was felt during the ravishing Rick Rude feud, which to me, bar none, was the greatest WWF feud of '88. There were others that were great, but this one was off the charts. I mean, you can't ask for better heat than some sleazy heel hitting on a babyface's wife. I mean, that had to be one of the greatest major league angles. I mean, for its time, it was absolutely amazing. Anyway, there was one more match on Saturday night's main event, another throwaway. At least, like David was saying, Jake was saying, he got a spot on the Saturday night's main event, which I have a feeling they also did just so nobody would be surprised he was in the building when the rescue was needed for Andre. And also, of course, let's entertain the fans and DDT Fuji. But in the other Saturday night's main event match to kick off New Year's '88, you basically had Greg the Hammer Valentine against Coco Beware, which would sell out arenas anywhere in the world. No, at this point, Greg Valentine was in his feud with Brutus Beefcake, his former Dream Team partner, and Coco Beware and Frankie were still dancing to Pile Driver, which had just come out a few months earlier. And, well, Coco did a lot of jobs at this time. This would be no exception. And I believe Brutus Beefcake would come out to rescue Coco when he couldn't get out of the figure four after the match. Valentine wouldn't let go. So they were further pushing the Beefcake Valentine feud, which was going around the horn and would stop at the Montreal Forum on March 14th for the Mad Dog Vachon fundraising special house show that night. And there you have it. What a way to kick off 1988 WWF style Saturday night's main event.
Oh yes, nothing like a throwaway match featuring the Hulk Hogan tax himself, Brutus the Barber Beefcake. You see, I didn't use the expletive that I used to say.
Well, you're evolving as a human, David. It's not that you were bad before, but you're evolving even further as you become, like with the wrestling masterclass that you were saying earlier. You're becoming more refined, and more. You're going to be like William Regal is going to teach you the art of English gentleman. You're like Bobby Eaton when he became the Earl of Eaton in the Blue Bloods, right? So.
Well, there's another thing. You can also pick up an Emily Post book, and then you can learn real etiquette.
Yeah. There's a name from the past. She's not around still, Emily Post. Yes, Emily Post. I remember that. So.
And before we segue into our next topic, now that we've mentioned Greg the Hammer Valentine and Coco Beware, here's another plug. May 30th at the Centre de Slush Puppy in Gatineau, Quebec. Greg the Hammer Valentine and Coco Beware, among many others, will be present for a meet and greet, autograph signing, and there will also be a GPW wrestling extravaganza followed by that. Among
Yeah.
the two mentioned, you will also see Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Lex Luger, Jacqueline, the Headbangers, Sean Mooney, and more.
Wow. It's going to be something.
And Jimmy Hart. We'll see if Jimmy Hart can make it, and maybe a couple of others.
Definitely don't want to miss that either. That's going to be a totally amazing way to a couple weeks after Mother's Day and Memorial Day, I believe, in the States, and just going to be a great May extravaganza. Spring is be spring fever, and what better way than to celebrate at the Slush Puppy Arena with the Legends of Wrestling and GPW.
So how about? And this was a surprise to me that you actually want to talk about this because this event, because this is around the time of the Attitude Era, which is around when. And you've told us, as well as myself, many times that this is around the time where you became completely and utterly disillusioned and checked out of wrestling entirely around this era. So we're talking about the WWF Capital Carnage event, which was a UK only pay-per-view, which took place at the London Arena on December the 6th, 1998. And this was broadcast exclusively in the United Kingdom and Canada. It would eventually make its way to WWF home video in the US.
Yeah. Well, it is a surprise. It's a surprise to me too, almost, except for the fact that it's interesting to me, first of all, because it's not a mainstream US event. If you didn't buy the videotape after, you couldn't see it on pay-per-view. Unless you had access to. I mean, to me, this is the era where it's like the last vestiges of what the wrestling business used to be. So yes, I was becoming extremely disillusioned. It had already been 10 months since I attended my last house show at the Forum. The year before, I attended my first Monday Night Raw taping in Lake Placid, New York. But no, I was definitely not thrilled at all with the direction that the two major wrestling companies had taken. But at least at this time, you still had some of the old school people hanging out, and even in the Attitude Era, which I did have my problems with, I mean, there were still obviously some incredible talents that were emerging, like the Steve Austins and the Rocks and the Kurt Angles and the guys like that. Yeah, so again, I mean, it's not an era I care to visit too often, but I am interested sometimes when there's something that, they'll always be talking about Survivor Series and SummerSlam and this Raw and that SmackDown. But I mean, this was a little off the beaten path, and that's why it interests me, because it's not a show that was basically made for the American and even in a way North American audiences, though in Canada we were able to see it. So I don't want to go crazy into it in depth, partially because of my own disdain for what was happening, but I have a lot of respect for the talent that was on this show. And yes, I mean, this was the time when the aforementioned Vinny Rubro was helping rewrite the rules of the wrestling business, unfortunately. And though it would produce dividends for a few years, you could argue that in the long run, it did a lot more damage to wrestling, even though people, of course, there's always going to be people nostalgic for the Attitude Era and they love it. Well, I mean, there are things to love about it, but honestly, what did it really do in the big picture looking back? I mean, the reason I think people are so fond of it now, because it's the last time wrestling was quote unquote truly good. And also, let's face it, that's what set the stage for wrestling not being good anymore. So a lot of people don't tend to realize or acknowledge that all they were doing was sowing the seeds of future destruction. But at the time, it was like a giant Roman orgy, so people couldn't resist loving what they loved about it. Some people now admit, okay, maybe not everything was great about it, but no, it was definitely a rebound from the mid-'90s lull, the early '90s lull, when things weren't that great. Now, the main highlights of this show looking back, and again, this wasn't catering to American audiences. American audiences weren't going to see it on TV. Couple of the big notes of coming out of the show is that they changed a couple of the major matches. Those who may find it peculiar to know that The Rock was defending his championship at that time against X-Pac on the show was kind of unusual because I don't recall X-Pac ever getting any kind of a championship run and at this time. But actually, what most people may not realize is Rock versus X-Pac was not the original intent of the advertised show. It was actually supposed to be the continuation of the Rock versus Triple H feud, which was going all around in that section of 98. So we're rewinding now to December 6th, 1998, I wish, Freudian slip. So the Rock versus X-Pac was a change because Rock versus Triple H was canceled for unknown reasons. Triple H would wrestle on the show Jeff Jarrett, and Rock would wrestle X-Pac. So one of the highlights of the show was just the bizarre change around in the lineup, even though both men, The Rock and Triple H, were allegedly healthy. They both wrestled on the show, but they didn't wrestle each other. To this day, I don't know the reasons for it. And I think even when Vinny Rubro was asked about it, he said he didn't know either because he wasn't really terribly involved in this show because it had nothing to do with the television product. It didn't even take place in North America, but for whatever reason, it happened the way it happened. And The Rock, of course, beat Triple H. And in terms of X-Pac and Triple H defeated Jeff Jarrett. I mean, the mixed tag team match proved to be really notable, and the fact that it was taking place in England was not a coincidence. Now, on one side, you had Jacqueline, who David remarked will be appearing at the GPW Legends Festival convention next year. Jacqueline would be teaming with Mark Marrow, who had split with Sable on camera by this point, and Sable would wind up teaming with Christian, who I guess this was around the time he was. No, he wasn't in the Brood, was he? No, Edge was in it. I don't know. Yeah, he was in the Brood.
Well, at the time, Christian was new to the WWF at the time because I remember seeing him for the first time around, I think it was Breakdown or Judgment Day 1998, so 2-3 months before this went down. And at one time, Christian had aligned himself with Gangrel, but they weren't really the Brood yet, or maybe they were. And he was also the light heavyweight champion at the time. It's a pretty odd pairing, to say the least.
That's what I was just going to say. Sable and Christian is a pretty odd pair. You're talking about Gangrel, or you're talking about Christian and Sable?
Well, I'm talking about Christian and Sable, but then again, Sable knows a lot about odd pairings.
She certainly does. She certainly does. And why that match is notable is not for the great wrestling action, because let's face it, Sable couldn't wrestle a lick. But when Jacqueline found herself on the on the shoulders of, I guess it was Mark Marrow, Sable or somebody reached out and grabbed her top or something just to tear her off of his shoulders, but accidentally a wardrobe malfunction occurred, and Jacqueline's entire top came off, exposing her breasts completely to the UK crowd. And apparently that X-rated moment was not even edited off the US videotape of the show because it wasn't on television. A home video, they didn't have to deal with the same censors. So if you ever want to see Jacqueline completely nude from the waist up, this was the show where it happened, and she was high up on Marrow's shoulders too. So
I can tell you, I could tell you who decided to keep it in, or who decided not to censor it.
I'm sure you could.
Yeah.
Yes, that might have been who it was. That might have been. So, going over the show very briefly without getting too much, I mean, a lot of the preliminary matches were throwaway. They were like 3 or 4 minute matches. A pretty shocking result had the Headbangers, who David also mentioned will be at the GPW Legends convention, are actually going over the Road Warriors, but it's not the original Road Warriors. They're going over the version of LOD 2000 that featured Darren Drozdov teaming with Animal when they were starting to be dissension between them. Hawk was already, AWOL or whatever, had left. But when you see it on paper, like, the Headbangers defeating the Legion of Doom, you're like, seems like unlikely. But this is, of course, pretty much at the end of that run. And unfortunately, Darren Drozdov's fate would meet him smack right up close and personal, a little bit less than a year after this, when he would become initially a quadriplegic in that infamous match that never aired on television with D'Lo Brown. And but here they actually had to separate Animal and Drozdov, who actually started fighting each other after the loss to the Headbangers. The aforementioned Gangrel got a win over Al Snow. An interesting match was Val Venus against Goldust. I'm going to actually talk about Val Venus in our last topic in a roundabout way, not to do with this time period. So that's going to be interesting for me because it brings it back to an earlier period. But on this show, what a match. I mean, 2 of the most outrageous characters, Val Venus looking real good and Goldust looking only the way Goldust could, and Val Venus getting the win. And the match after that was kind of interesting because another failed experiment of the WWF, the way we're talking about Van Hammer and WCW, the one and only Tiger Ali Singh was on this show, and he actually got a win over Edge, if you could believe it. So at this time, Edge was pretty new, and Tiger Ali Singh, they had some big plans for if things had gone right, maybe. And Tiger Ali Singh, and again, this is over in the UK where his father, Tiger Jeet Singh, was kind of a big deal. So much like they were kind of marketing the Great Khali and Jinder Mahal for India, Tiger Ali Singh wouldn't only have been big in India, ideally, but very large East Indian population in the UK. And so this was, like almost like a homecoming, even though Tiger Ali Singh is not British by origin. He could be a hero to a lot of people in England. Of course, Tiger Ali Singh's run would tank, and so would his career, unfortunately. Some people have spoken highly about him. He definitely had a good look. He had charisma. He was good on the mic, but there were issues, and his dad didn't really get along with management, and management being Vince McMahon, pretty much. So there were issues. But on this show, Edge actually lost to Tiger Ali Singh. In the context of the time and the place, it does make sense. But that being that, the other match of note, pretty much before we get to the main event, had Ken Shamrock, another excellent real mixed martial arts fighter who, of course, got into wrestling and wrestled as Vince Torelli for George Scott, who we talked about earlier, when George Scott and Robert Fuller were promoting and booking in the North Carolina area, the NAWA, which used to be called something else, South Atlantic Pro Wrestling? I don't know. Yeah, I think it was South Atlantic Pro Wrestling, became the NAWA. Ken Shamrock had a pre-WWF career there as Vince Torelli, which is where he had his altercation with the Nasty Boys, and I think which led to the immense heat and revenge that Ken Shamrock tried to exact later on the Nasty Boys. We've talked about that in the past. But on this show, Ken Shamrock was battling the Big Boss Man, and Ken Shamrock had the Big Boss Man in his corner, not the Big Boss Man David Buchanan, but the original Ray Traylor. And Ken Shamrock got himself a win over Steve Blackman, which was kind of interesting. But the main event had a really excellent 4-way match where you had Stone Cold Steve Austin, you had Mick Foley in the Mankind persona, you also had Kane and you also had The Undertaker. So it was quite a wild, over 20-minute match between these four, and they even got Vinnie Jones involved. Do you know who Vinnie Jones is, David?
Absolutely. He was a big, big star in the UK. I first became aware of Vinnie Jones. I think the very first time I ever saw him in a movie was when I saw the Guy Ritchie movie Snatch, with
Mm-hmm.
that also starred Brad Pitt, Dennis Farina.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So he made the trip. Well, do you know why he was a big star in England?
I believe it. Well, I know he was also, wasn't he a soccer player as well, or a renowned soccer player? Because I remember he did that movie called Mean Machine.
Okay. Yeah, he was. He was actually a soccer player, also known as a footballer. There. Uh,
Exactly. And a lot of people, across the pond get quite offended when you say soccer. And,
yeah.
but they like their football, but they also love the other football too. But that was just a little parentheses.
Well, that's it. Most of our audience isn't in the UK, so apologies if we offended anyone. But he was a
Sorry,
footballer.
James. Sorry, James. Well, James doesn't even really know who I am, but I'm talking about another fellow YouTuber whose channel that I subscribe to.
Ah, yes, the one and only James Romero, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, yes. Well, James, being offended or not, let's face it, he shouldn't mess with the big boss man, David Buchanan. So David was nice enough to apologize for that. But, well, David's absolutely right. Vinnie Jones was a footballer, a soccer player, rather, whatever, and segued into acting and was just, at this time in England, a huge star, of course, and he got involved in the main event. It was even Shane McMahon was involved. There was a whole bunch of characters. There was a lot of chaos and quite a melee. But Steve Austin, of course, of course, he emerged victorious over the other three. And obviously, if you're going to get Glenn Jacobs, Mick Foley, The Undertaker, and Austin in there, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a pretty excellent match. And that's what you had to end Capital Carnage. Again, not seen in the US except on videotape, and one of my rare forays into the Attitude Era, but I was happy to do it for this particular show.
And you also wanted, of course, we also wanted to talk about a specific event which would go down on December 10th, 1972. 53 years ago on that date, the Nature Boy, woo! Ric Flair would make his professional wrestling debut in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. And Ric Flair would wrestle George Scrap Iron Godosky to a time limit draw. So even before the Nature Boy was the Nature Boy, he was still wrestling them. He was still going Broadway.
He definitely was, and I don't know if that lake in Wisconsin is filled with rice or not, but it's a heck of a place to make a debut in the Midwest. And Ric Flair that year had trained in Verne Gagne's famous wrestling camp. The very first year that Verne Gagne had multiple wrestlers training under him, because before that he would only agree to train one wrestler a year, or future wrestler, and then off they went. This was the first year Verne Gagne held a camp with multiple wrestlers. One of them was Ric Flair. Another was Ken Patera. Another was Bob Bruggers, who was in that famous plane crash with Flair. 3 years later, Jim Brunzell, was he in that camp? No, Greg Gagne himself, the son of Verne Gagne, was in that camp. And the Iron Sheik, I think, was in that camp. And anyway, but Ric Flair at this time was a bit different than the Nature Boy we all came to know and some love, but we all respect for his amazing professional career and accomplishments. And at this time, Ric Flair didn't look like the Ric Flair we came to know a decade or two later. He was actually around almost 300 pounds at this time and was kind of like a sort of big bodybuilder type sort of guy, or just a really thick guy, and he was obviously he was green if this was his first match, and they gave him a very capable opponent. He was wrestling George Scrap Iron Godowski, who after his mid-card type career kind of faded, he would go on to do a lot of enhancement talent work for Vern Gagne's AWA, and I believe wrestled a lot in Kansas City too, and other areas like that. A real journeyman type of wrestler, George Godowski. But amazingly, yes, Ric Flair went to a time limit draw with Godowski all the way back at the end of 1972. So Ric Flair has basically really been in the wrestling business more than 50 years. And if you don't count his last match 3 years ago, would go on to wrestle for 50 years after this debut match. So we celebrate and toast the another living legend, Ric Flair, as he made his debut against Godowski 53 years ago, December 10th. Take it away, David.
So one of the last but certainly not least topics that we're going to be discussing this week is a sad near final gasp of the American Wrestling Association, or as at one time Bobby the Brain Heenan referred to them as, the Alzheimer's Wrestling Association, or All the World's Assholes, actually took place in Toronto, Ontario, here in Canada, as December the 6th would mark the 36th anniversary of a show at the exhibition place that only drew an anemic an approximation, if you will, 200 fans. Local talent was used to round out the card as well. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so basically this was the last really active year of business for the AWA. They wouldn't last as a touring entity much into the next year, but they stumbled along. And this is kind of a sad point because, well, I mean, again, most of the talent had migrated to WCW, the WWF, had gone to Japan. Vern didn't have much left, and people weren't showing up to the shows and to watch them, and the TV ratings had plummeted, and he was left with a crew of mostly older guys who didn't have much where else to go, or at the end of their career, or people that were family, like his son Greg, and even Larry Zbyszko, who was the world champion at this time, is the husband of, or unless they're divorced, I don't remember, married the daughter of Vern Gagne, so he was a member of Vern Gagne's family through marriage. And Larry Zbyszko had a memorable 2 reigns as AWA champion, basically the last AWA champion. So yeah, this show, I mean, they were really pulling teeth. They even had a title change on the show, if you could believe it. The AWA women's title changed hands, and they had Candy Devine basically defeat Judy Martin, one half of the WWF's Glamour Girls, to win the women's title. And she may have very well, I'm sure, been the last women's champion, other than unless, because I remember at this time they were really pushing Magnificent Mimi on AWA television. I don't know if you remember Magnificent Mimi, but she was like either an adult film star, an exotic dancer. I forget what she did when she wasn't wrestling. I think she was involved maybe in like either mud wrestling too, or apartment wrestling. I don't know. Anyway, they tried to push her really hard.
Boxing.
Or Foxy Boxing. Maybe so. But Candy Devine versus Magnificent Mimi was the last AWA women's feud that I recall. And Candy Devine here was basically made the champion over Judy Martin. I don't even remember Judy Martin really being the AWA women's champion. I remember her being around. You know, they weren't running that many shows at this time, but so Toronto, you know, they got themselves a title change. In terms of the local talent, they used some interesting guys. Ricky Johnson against Dan Johnson was a match on this card, and Dan Johnson actually had a moment of American fame, because if you go back and watch WCW Starrcade's 1990 version, when they had the Pat O'Connor Memorial Tag Team Tournament, the representatives for Canada were a team called Troy Montour and Danny Bull Johnson. And Dan Johnson was Danny Bull Johnson, was the Canadian wrestler who never made a name for himself in the States, but he was a big guy, a talented amateur style type wrestler who at one point took on the indigenous gimmick. I think he may have actually been of indigenous origin, but they did, they kind of made him the stereotyped indigenous character, which later on Charlie Norris would sue WCW for, but it made Charlie Norris rest in peace. But they had, so they had some of that local talent on the show. Ricky Johnson, I don't even know who Ricky Johnson is. I guess a relative of Danny Johnson, I suppose. But in turn, they also had the Indestructible Machine go against Ned Tyson, which was also Canadian talent. They were not they were like independent Canadian wrestlers who never made it south of the border. Nick DiCarlo may have been one of those guys too, but the guy he wrestled was actually really interesting, and I wanted to talk about him. This is Jason Sterling, and Jason Sterling did have American success, but the reason he was on a Canadian card is because he has a very big link to Canada, because he comes from a Canadian wrestling family. Jason Sterling, his real name is Jason Robertson, and he is the son of the one and only Dewey Robertson, the missing link, who he became the missing link halfway into his career. I know Bobby Heenan was famous for talking about the missing link because he managed him for a short time in the WWF. Do you remember that, David?
Yes. Bobby would talk about this in a 2001-2002 shoot interview, which is available on YouTube. And I believe it was Rob Feinstein who was interviewing him. And he was talking, for some reason or another, the missing link came up. And Dewey would ask Bobby, says, hey, what time does your flight leave? So he tells him what time his flight leaves. And he says, would you mind if I went to the airport with you? Because, in my gimmick, I'm really not supposed to be talking. And he says, well, let me get one thing straight with you. Okay? I only manage you 10 minutes a night. I am not your manager outside this ring. You're on your own, pal. Not that those were the exact words, but the message behind the message that I gave in my own words was loud and clear.
That's right. So needless to say, Bobby Heenan did not last long with the missing link, and the missing link himself didn't last long. He went on to other wrestling companies. But I mean, he was interesting though. He had his gimmick was tailor made for the WWF, right? I mean, a face painted green and wild hair, and was supposedly some kind of
prehistoric guy.
Yeah, exactly. But actually, the real story of why him and his wife, who often worked as his valet Sheena, not in the WWF, but in other territories, his wife, I forgot her real name, but Mrs. Robertson, if you will. Do you know what was so interesting about them that the wrestlers couldn't get over in real life away from the ring?
What was that?
They actually were nudists and would carry out their civilian lives as nudists and would spend time in nudist colonies and nudist beaches. I don't know how they raised the children, but they were pretty much always naked if they weren't out in the general public. So
they certainly weren't naked and afraid.
No, they were, and there weren't too many missing links between them. So it's pretty weird. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. But anyway, Jason Robertson went on to a wrestling career as Jason Sterling, and his biggest time in the wrestling business, actually, they moved around a lot, but originally from Canada. Basically, Jason Sterling followed his dad into world-class championship wrestling, which by this time, basically, Fritz von Erich had handed it over to Ken Mantell and the Von Erich boys, who kind of basically ran it into the ground until Jerry Jarrett bought it and made it the USWA. But Jason Sterling had a good run with Eric Embry, who I've talked about before, the flamboyant Eric Embry, and they basically also in the light heavyweight division. I mean, at this time, I forgot to mention about Steve Regal before, that he had a run in world class around a little before this too, and he had some amazing battles with Von Erich friend Brian Adias, who was a tremendous babyface, eventually turned heel in world class championship wrestling. That's another area where Steve Regal had a good run, but Jason Sterling had easily the best run of his career, being featured at world class, and the pinnacle, he said, was in 1988 at the annual fifth annual David Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions, which at this time had been renamed the David and Mike Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions, because Mike had died the year before in 1987, was also the last Parade of Champions, and Jason Sterling had his biggest match on here on that show. But by 89, times had gotten hard. He didn't like when the USWA took over, and it was pretty bad, he said, when Jerry Jarrett took over. So his big-time American career was kind of over, went back to Canada. And so he actually has had many chaotic things happen to him in his life. It's really been tumultuous. But at this time in 89, he'd probably take an independent booking anywhere, and right in his backyard, he wrestled on this AWA show. Not the first time he'd wrestled for the AWA, but as far as I know. But basically on this show, he was there. And he lost to Nick DiCarlo. Now, Jason Sterling actually found his way back from the brink of poverty when he opened a wrestling school in Ontario. And Jason Sterling thought he could have a new career training wrestlers. Well, maybe he could, but he had trouble attracting people at first who were serious. A lot of competition throughout America. This time wrestling schools were really popping up everywhere. But in the early 90s, a young man named Sean Morley came to him and offered him $3,500 to train him. I think in cash even, maybe. So this really got Jason Sterling back on his feet, where he was able to, instead of using his backyard or whatever, he could use rent a real space. And I guess you can tell us who Sean Morley went on to become.
Oh, ladies.
That's right.
Need I say more?
Not really, Mr. Valboski, because that's right. Sean Morley basically took the lessons that Jason Sterling, a.k.a. Jason Robertson, taught him, and eventually became Val Venus, of course, after wrestling in Mexico under other names and etc. And he really obviously became a big success. So obviously and easily Jason Sterling's biggest success running a wrestling school. But on this show for the AWA, he was losing to Nick DiCarlo. A name that didn't really make it in the wrestling business, but Jason Sterling lay down for him. And the bigger matches on the show had Paul Diamond, who major respect for the future Max Moon, and Kato of the Orient Express, but one half of Bad Company, BADD Bad, with Pat Tanaka, of course, in the AWA. Paul Diamond was basically reborn as a babyface in the AWA at this time, and he got the win over the illustrious Johnny Stewart, a very flamboyant character at that time. And other than the Candy Divine match, the main event was between world champion Larry Zbyszko and one of his top challengers at the time, and this was when the Team Challenge series was going on. A leader of one of the other teams, Sergeant Snipers, talking, of course, about Robert Remus, a.k.a. Sergeant Slaughter. Zbyszko versus Slaughter was on top, and they still only drew 200 fans. G.I. Joe was on the way down at this time, unfortunately, it seems. So.
Well, it's now that we're talking about G.I. Joe, there was actually a video or a little mini documentary I watched just yesterday on YouTube about the rise and fall of the whole G.I. Joe franchise.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was so hot for a number of years, but by the early 90s, it really started to fade.
Well, the video insists that by 1987 people had lost interest, or that it had gone downhill as of 1987.
Well, I think that was certainly, yeah. I mean, that was when the tide really, really turned big time. But it would still kind of, I think, limp on for a few more years, but not at all the same as and of course there were a lot of reasons, involving the movie and the TV show, and the company, the toy companies, and whatever and stuff, and the action figures, of course, and so Sergeant Slaughter would actually have his deal with GI Joe terminated the following year. This is already December '89, and of course in '90 he would proudly return to the World Wrestling Federation. As we know, the rest is Iraqi sympathizer history.
Well, and he wanted his country back.
Yeah, and he got it. I mean, he's still making the rounds at conventions, so props
Is he
to
ever?
yeah.
Is he ever?
So props to another guy who survived the old school of wrestling and is still, and even survived cancer, and he's still around. So good for him.
Oh yeah, as Luigi Patterson said, when he was born, the doctors had to pull him out by the chin.
That's right. That's right. He's got the that chin that will enter a room before he does. That's for sure.
Well, those are all the topics that we have. We hope you all enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too disappointing. But just a reminder, what we've all been waiting to do since January is to say goodbye and good riddance to the year that was 2025. And no better way to do it for the first time in 4 years, and the first time I'm doing this with a tag team partner as opposed to doing this solo. It'll be the Freeform Friday year-end reviews. And here's how it works. We have some categories, which I posted roughly around the last time that Alan and I went live on my Facebook feed. And none of you commented, a couple of you liked it. But if you would like to come on the show, and if you'd like to join us, you're more than welcome to. But at least let me know privately. So here are some of the topics that we will be discussing. And this does not just cater to the world of wrestling. It could be almost anything, such as biggest winner, biggest wrestler, most original, most stagnant, best or worst politician, best or worst wrestler, or a person of the year, the Enough Already Award of the Year, and many, many, many others. You're welcome to come up with a list of your own should you choose to. I can't make you do it, but you're welcome to.
Well, if Nikolai Volkov was still around, I would give him personally the most ignominious, even 40 years after the fact, the Slammy that he won for most ignominious wrestler, which he didn't even know what the word meant, and he was.
I don't even know what the word means.
Well, that's it. He's like, he's thanking Vince McMahon and Gorilla Monsoon, and thank you, I'm so honored. But then he's like, then Vince, I believe, was the one who said, "Do you know what ignominious means?" Like Gorilla Monsoon knew all the fancy words, and Volkov said, "No, what does it mean? I'm so happy to win this award." He said, "Well, ignominious is a synonym for ignorant, malignant, disgusting, pathetic, whatever. It's like the worst quality somebody could have." And then Volkov is really shocked, and he's like, "Well, what? Yes, you are the most ignominious wrestler of the," and he won his Slammy Award for being most ignominious. Just such a great word. So. Maybe that Mr. Iguana guy would like to win Mr. Ignominious. I don't know.
Yeah, Mr. Iguana and that lady in AEW that has the Mercedes Moné hand puppet, whose name I can't recall at this time.
And you won't recall it a year from now, where she'll be doing something else, probably.
So that's what we will definitely be doing. We will have our year-end awards show, and it'll be at some point before the year is over. So we can finally say goodbye and good riddance and hail and farewell to the year that was.
I certainly cannot wait.
On that note, thank you all so much for joining us. And just another friendly reminder, if you haven't already, be sure to hit that like, subscribe, and hit all notifications so you get advised every time we go live and every time we upload some new content up here on the channel. Thank you all so much for joining us, and most likely we probably won't be going live next week. So to each and every one of you, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Bah Humbug.
Happy Festivus.
Oh, yes, and Happy Festivus, the airing of grievances.
You got it.
Thank you all so much. Have a good night. We'll see you next time.